I'm Alexis Moreno, 28, gripping Grandma's scarf as I sit through the funeral in Portland, Maine. My family's grief feels like a performance. Mom fakes tears, snapping photos for her followers. Bad angle, she hisses, adjusting her pose. Dad argues over costs, eyes glued to his stocks. Hours later, the attorney drops a bomb. I inherit $22.5 million. Mom's smile vanishes. Dad mutters, "No way." My brother glares, accusing me of scheming. A video plays Grandma and Grandpa, their voices firm. "Some of you only saw our money." My chest tightens, but I stay quiet. That night at family dinner, it all erupted. Mom demands I sign over control. I refuse. Her hand flies, slapping my cheek hard. "You don't deserve it." "You have no say here," she snapped. The table freezes. I don't flinch, just walk out, pull my phone. Fingers trembling, I type cancel everything. Immediately. A move they'd regret by morning. What I did next flipped their world upside down. They thought they could break me, but I was just getting started. Before I get to my story, I want to know what time and what city you're listening in. I'm glad to know how far my story has spread. The next morning, my phone buzzed with Dad's voicemail. His voice came through sharp and angry. "What the hell did you do, Alexis? Fix this, or you're done." I replayed it twice, my heart pounding. In the background, I heard Mom yelling about the power outage and Jacob complaining about no Wi-Fi. Their house must have gone dark from the services I canceled last night, the bills I'd been covering for months without them knowing. I couldn't stay. Grabbing my backpack, I stuffed in clothes, a laptop, and Grandma's scarf. The apartment keys dug into my palm as I locked up, aware Dad controlled the lease. One word from him and eviction papers would arrive. I slipped down the stairs, avoiding neighbors, and hit the road before traffic picked up. The drive to the harbor house felt endless, the bay's outline emerging as dawn broke. I parked by the old wooden steps, the place looking unchanged despite everything. Before I reached the door, it swung open. A middle-aged man with graying hair and a quiet demeanor stepped out. "Miss Alexis, welcome," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Luis Alvarez, the estate manager here for 15 years. He guided me inside the familiar creak of floors, easing my tension a bit. "Your grandparents trusted me with this." Luis pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. "They said you'd need it if family turned ugly." We moved to Grandpa's study, the desk cluttered with old ledgers from their seafood business. I inserted the drive files, popping up instantly. The first document was an email chain from 3 years back. Dad pleading for $100,000, promising quick returns on his latest scheme. Grandpa replied cautiously but attached transfer confirmation. Follow-ups showed no repayment, Dad dodging questions. Another folder held scanned journals. One entry detailed Mom arriving with real estate agents, measuring rooms and snapping photos. "Oh, she claims it's for redecorating ideas," Grandma wrote. But I overheard her discussing market value. My fingers scrolled faster, uncovering more. Thousands wired to Jacob's failed app ventures, each one defaulted. Property deeds, Mom tried pushing through last year, claiming updates for tax purposes. They'd been chipping away at the estate piece by piece while pretending to care. A soft tap at the door broke my focus. Denise Ellis, the housekeeper, entered, carrying tea, her eyes red from recent loss. "Reading Mrs. Crystal's records?" she asked, setting the tray down. It wasn't a question. I kept copies too, as she asked. She returned with a box of printouts, loan agreements, startup proposals, all unpaid. "Your mother even tried getting signatures during hospital visits." The evidence piled up like waves crashing. They'd exploited every visit, every favor. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. Just then, my phone dinged, a text from Brandy Kim. "On my way, heard about the mess." As my colleague at the school, she knew my family's patterns. Minutes later, she arrived, hugging me without words. We sat together, sifting through files. "This is insane," Brandy said, pointing to a wire transfer. "They've been leeching for years." Her tech savvy helped organize the digital mess, flagging patterns I missed. As we worked, the weight shifted from panic to purpose. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind about standing firm. By afternoon, the house felt like a fortress. Luis checked in, offering to secure the gates. "Your grandparents prepared for this," he said. Brandy nodded. "We need a plan." I agreed, knowing the fight was just beginning. The next afternoon, I sat at Grandpa's desk, the USB drive still warm in my hand from yesterday's discoveries. The harbor house creaked softly, a familiar comfort, but my pulse raced. I needed help. I dialed Ryan Hayes, the family attorney who'd read the will. "Alexis, I'm on my way," he said, voice steady. Within hours, the dining room filled with faces I hadn't expected to lean on. Ryan arrived first, his leather briefcase stuffed with legal folders. "Your grandparents trusted me for 20 years, he said, setting up at the table. Victoria Grant, their financial advisor, followed, her tablet glowing with account details. "I've locked the estate funds tight," she assured me. Anna Reed, Grandpa's business partner at the seafood chain, strode in next, her expression grim. "Someone sniffing around our suppliers, asking about contracts." Denise Ellis, the housekeeper, slipped in quietly, clutching a folder of her own records. Brandy Kim, my colleague from school, sat beside me, scrolling her phone. "Check this," she said, tilting the screen. Mom had posted on Instagram a tearful selfie captioned, "Betrayed by family fighting for what's ours." The post already had hundreds of likes, comments piling up from strangers in Portland. "She's painting you as the villain," Brandy muttered, her fingers flying to screenshot it. I rubbed my temples, the sting of Mom's slap still fresh in my mind. "They're not stopping," I said. Ryan nodded, pulling out papers. "We can file for protective orders, but we need more evidence." Denise set her folder down. "I've got something." She opened it to reveal bank statements, each highlighting transfers to Dad's failing real estate deals. "Mrs. Crystal asked me to track every dollar." Anna spoke up. "Employees at the seafood stores reported odd calls, someone claiming to represent the family, digging for financials." My stomach twisted. Jacob's tech startup had always burned through cash, and now it seemed he was targeting the business. Victoria tapped her tablet. "I found withdrawals attempted last week blocked because your grandparents changed the access codes." Luis Alvarez appeared at the doorway holding a small hard drive. "Miss Alexis, the security system recorded everything." We crowded around Grandpa's old computer as he plugged it in. Footage from the day of the funeral loaded, Mom wrapping silverware in her scarf, Dad pocketing a signed ledger, Jacob slipping a small painting under his jacket. They'd moved through the house like scavengers, their fake tears barely dry. "That's theft," Ryan said, his pen scratching notes. "This plus the financial records gives us grounds for legal action." Brandy zoomed in on a frame. "Look, Mom's checking prices on her phone while grabbing stuff." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected, their greed laid bare in grainy video. My phone buzzed again, another voicemail, this time from Jacob. "You're making a mistake, Alexis," he said, his voice low. "Hand it over or we'll make things public." I played it for the group, my hands shaking. Brandy frowned. "He's bluffing, but they're coordinated. That Instagram post wasn't random." Victoria leaned forward. "Your grandparents set up a trust structure to protect the estate from this kind of grab. I've got the portfolio details, 22.5 million, mostly in business assets and investments." Anna added. "The seafood chain's employees are loyal. They're ready to back you if this hits the community." Denise spoke softly. "Mrs. Crystal knew this would happen. She told me to watch your mother especially." Her folder included a letter from Mom to Grandma dated last year, pushing for a quick sale of the harbor house. "For your benefit," it claimed, but the attached appraisal showed millions in potential profit. I stood pacing the room. The weight of their lies pressed down, but the team around me felt like a lifeline. "What's our next step?" I asked. Ryan flipped open his laptop. "We compile this camera footage, financials, that letter, and file for emergency orders. Main courts move fast on clear evidence." Brandy's phone pinged. "Another post," she said, her voice tight. Mom had doubled down now, hinting at my unstable behavior to her followers. Comments from local business owners I recognized stung the most, questioning my character. "We need to counter this," Brandy urged, already drafting a response from my account. Luis checked his phone. "The gates are secure, but I'll monitor for visitors." Anna nodded. "I'll warn the store managers to report any more strange calls." The room hummed with purpose, each person a piece of the defense I hadn't known I'd need. As daylight faded, I looked at the team. Grandpa's words about standing firm rang in my ears. They thought they could bully me into submission, but every lie they told was building my case stronger. 3 days after the team meeting, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I sat in Grandpa's study, the harbor house quiet except for the faint hum of waves outside. Brandy Kim leaned over my shoulder, her laptop open. "Your mom's gone viral," she said, voice tight. I glanced at her screen. Mom's latest Instagram post, a video of her in a black dress dabbing tears. "My own daughter turned against us, stealing what belongs to the family," she said to thousands of followers. Comments flooded in, locals I knew calling me greedy, unstable. My throat tightened, but I pushed it down. Brandy scrolled further. "She's tagging businesses in Portland, stirring up trouble." I checked my email. My principal had forwarded a message from Dad. "We're concerned about Alexis's mental state," it read, claiming I wasn't fit to teach. The school hadn't bought it, but the accusations stung. "They're hitting you from every angle," Brandy said, her fingers tapping furiously. My phone pinged again, a direct message with a video link. I clicked and my stomach dropped. It was Grandma and Grandpa, or so it looked, speaking in stilted voices. "Alexis pressured us to change the will," the fake grandma said. "We were scared." The video was a deepfake, their faces oddly stiff. But it was convincing enough to fool most. "This is next level," Brandy muttered, pausing the clip. "Jacob's tech skills, I bet." I called Ryan Hayes immediately. "They're escalating," I said, forwarding the video. "This is slander, Alexis," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "We can use it against them." Brandy, already on her laptop, pulled up software to analyze the file. "Metadata shows it was made 2 days ago," she said, pointing to timestamps. "I can trace the upload to an IP linked to Jacob's startup server." Her tech know-how was a lifeline I hadn't expected. Ryan arrived within the hour, his briefcase heavier than before. The camera footage from the funeral, Denise's financial records, and now this deepfake. "It's enough for emergency protective orders," he said, spreading papers across the table. "Maine courts prioritize clear evidence of harassment." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "File them," I said. "All of them." Brandy kept digging, her screen glowing with code. "Got it," she said, pulling up a report. "The deepfake used a free AI tool, sloppy work. I've isolated artifacts, pixel distortions, audio glitches. We can prove it's fake." She emailed the analysis to Ryan, who added it to the legal packet. "This strengthens our case," he said, his pen moving fast. "They're trying to ruin your reputation, but they've overplayed their hand." By the next morning, Mom's Instagram had another post, a photo of me as a teenager, captioned, "She's always been troubled." Locals I'd grown up with were liking it, their comments sharp. I felt exposed, but Brandy squeezed my hand. "They're desperate," she said. "Let's stay focused." I took a breath, remembering Grandpa's advice to keep my head clear. Victoria Grant called with an update. "Your parents tried accessing the estate accounts again, denied thanks to the new codes." Anna Reed texted next. "Store managers got emails from an anonymous account questioning the seafood chain's stability." "It's your family, no doubt. Their moves were relentless, but each one gave us more to work with." Ryan filed the protective orders that afternoon, citing harassment, theft, and defamation. "Maine's Title 19A is strict on this," he explained. "With the deepfake and Instagram posts, we're looking at a quick approval." By the end of the week, the court responded, temporary orders granted, barring Mom, Dad, and Jacob from contacting me or the business directly. Violations could mean fines or jail time. Brandy showed me a draft post for my own account. A simple statement. "Lies spread fast, but truth lasts longer." We held off posting, waiting for Ryan's advice. "Let the orders hit first," he said. "They won't expect it." I looked out the window, the harbor's gray waves steady against the chaos. My family thought they could bury me with lies, but every step they took was digging their own hole deeper. A week after the protective orders were filed, I stood outside the Portland Chamber of Commerce, the harbor's salty breeze cutting through my jacket. The luncheon was set to honor Grandma and Grandpa's seafood business, a legacy spanning decades. My stomach churned knowing Mom, Dad, and Jacob would show up. Ryan Hayes adjusted his tie beside me. "Stay calm," he said. "The community's watching." Inside the banquet hall buzzed with local business owners, their chatter pausing as I entered. Anna Reed, already at our table, leaned in. "Employees are here to back you," she whispered, nodding toward a group in company polos. Brandy Kim, phone in hand, scanned the room. "No sign of them yet," she said, but her eyes stayed sharp. The chamber president, a gray-haired man named Tom Wheeler, took the podium. "We're here to celebrate the Moreno family's contribution to Portland." He began, holding up a plaque. "Their seafood chain built jobs and trust." Applause rippled, but I caught movement at the entrance. Mom swept in, her black dress camera ready, Dad and Jacob trailing. Their faces were all confidence, like they owned the place. Mom made a beeline for Tom, her voice loud enough to carry. "There's been a misunderstanding about the estate," she said, dabbing her eyes. "We're here to claim family heirlooms rightfully ours." Dad stepped forward, his tone smooth. "The business belongs to all of us, not just one person." Jacob hung back, his expression uneasy, avoiding my gaze. I stood, my legs steady despite the nerves. "Those heirlooms were left to me," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. "The will is clear." Gasps spread as Tom frowned, glancing between us. Mom's smile faltered, but she pressed on. "Alexis isn't equipped to manage this. She's confused, unstable." Before I could respond, a woman in the crowd stood, Mrs. Larson, a neighbor who'd known Grandma for years. "I saw you take silverware from their house the day of the funeral." She called out, her phone raised with a photo. "Posted it online too." Murmurs grew. A store manager in a polo stood next. "Anonymous emails tried to scare our suppliers, but we know the Morenos' real wishes." Brandy leaned over, whispering, "Check Twitter." I glanced at her phone. Local reporters were live tweeting, quoting Mrs. Larson. A news van idled outside, its logo visible through the window. "Who called the media?" Dad snapped, his face reddening. Another neighbor, Mr. Coleman, raised his hand. "I did. We protect our own in Portland." Mom clutched her purse, her composure cracking. "This is a family matter," she said, voice shrill. But the room wasn't hers. Anna stood, her voice cutting through. "The seafood chain thrives because of Eric and Crystal's integrity, not yours." Employees nodded, some clapping. A reporter approached, microphone ready, asking about the will. Ryan handed me a folder. "Show them," he said. I held up a copy of the will, my voice clear. "Grandma and Grandpa chose me to carry their legacy. Every move you've made proves why." The crowd's applause drowned out Mom's protest. Jacob shifted, his eyes meeting mine for a split second, guilt maybe, but he stayed silent. Dad grabbed Mom's arm, steering her toward the exit. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his steps were hurried. Jacob followed, head down, avoiding the staring crowd. The news van's camera tracked them as they left, their united front crumbling under the town's gaze. Tom returned to the podium, handing me the plaque. "To Alexis Moreno for upholding the Moreno legacy," he said. The room stood, clapping their support, a warmth I hadn't expected. Brandy grinned, snapping a photo. "This is going viral for the right reasons," she said. As we sat back down, Anna squeezed my shoulder. "Your grandparents would be proud." I held the plaque, its weight grounding me. They'd tried to tear me down in front of everyone, but Portland saw through their lies. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time I felt the town behind me. 3 months after the mediation, I sat at my desk in the Portland Elementary School, my nameplate, Alexis Moreno teacher, still the title that grounded me. The Harbor House had become my home, its quiet floors a reminder of Grandma and Grandpa's trust. I'd spent weeks setting up the Moreno Foundation, a scholarship fund for kids training in the seafood trade. Today, the first recipients would visit. 5 teenagers filed into my classroom clutching acceptance letters. Their eyes widened as I explained the program: full tuition for vocational courses, stipends for living, and apprenticeships at the family seafood chain. My grandparents believed in building futures, I told them, handing out packets. One girl, nervous but bright, whispered, "This changes everything." I smiled, thinking of Grandpa's lessons about hard work. Outside school, I'd blocked Mom's number after her last text, a plea for family unity, with a link to her latest Instagram sob story. Dad's emails demanding a cut of the $22.5 million went unanswered. Jacob sent one message asking to meet just us. I deleted it. Their signatures on the mediation agreement bound them to return stolen items, silverware, ledgers, a painting, all back in the house now. Contact was over. Ryan Hayes called with updates. "Your parents violated the protective orders," he said. "They emailed a supplier claiming you're mismanaging the business." The court wasn't lenient. Fines hit Dad's already crumbling real estate ventures, pushing him toward Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His credit score, once his pride, was wrecked, locking him out of new deals. Portland's business circle, tight-knit and loyal to Grandpa's legacy, cut ties with him. Brandy Kim stopped by the house that evening carrying takeout from a local seafood shack. "Your mom's influencer gigs are drying up," she said, scrolling through Twitter. Brianna's followers had dropped after a local news outlet ran a story on the mediation citing her theft and defamation. A civil lawsuit for slander filed by Ryan on my behalf loomed over her. Maine's courts didn't take kindly to her public lies, and her brand deals vanished as sponsors backed away. Jacob's startup was the next to fall. Investors, spooked by the family's actions, pulled funding from his app project. Ryan had warned that elder abuse charges were still on the table, and if pursued, Jacob could face probation under Maine law. His last email hinted at regret, but I didn't reply. Their choices had carved a line I wouldn't cross. The seafood chain thrived under Anna Reed's management, with employees now sharing profits through a new plan I'd pushed for. Victoria Grant sent financial reports showing the estate's investments stable and growing. "Your grandparents would be proud," she wrote. I walked through the harbor house, touching Grandma's knitting basket untouched since her passing. Their trust wasn't just the money, it was the values they'd instilled. One afternoon, Luis Alvarez brought a box from the attic labeled "For Alexis." Inside were Grandpa's old business journals detailing the seafood chain's start in the 1960s. A note from Grandma tucked between pages read, "Stand firm, Alexis. Family is who lifts you, not who takes." I held it, my eyes stinging, but kept moving forward. At school, a student sat in my office, her voice shaky. "My parents say I owe them for everything," she said, echoing my own past. I handed her a packet: resources for setting boundaries, something I'd learned the hard way. "You're worth more than their demands." I told her words I wished I'd heard sooner. 6 months after the mediation, the Portland Press-Herald ran a feature on the Moreno Foundation. "Local teacher honors family legacy," the headline read. The article detailed the scholarship's employee profit sharing and the seafood chain's community impact. Not a word about my family's drama. Ryan had kept it out of the press, per my request. I walked the harbor house grounds, stopping at a new bench by the water, a plaque engraved "Crystal and Eric Moreno Legacy Through Love." The team, Ryan, Brandy, Anna, Victoria, Luis, Denise, gathered for a quiet dinner that night. The dining table, once a battleground, now filled with laughter. They were my family now, bound by actions, not blood. Mom, Dad, and Jacob kept trying: texts, emails, even a letter from Mom's lawyer. I ignored them all, my phone's block list growing. Their world had collapsed under the weight of their greed, and I'd built something lasting in its place. The lesson was clear: family isn't owed loyalty if they betray you. Setting boundaries, hard as it was, protected what mattered most. 7 students arrived that morning, nervous but eager, holding scholarship acceptance letters. I handed out packets detailing full tuition monthly stipends and guaranteed jobs at the family's seafood chain. Grandma and Grandpa built this business on hard work, I said, watching their faces light up. One boy, barely 16, grinned. This means I can stay here, not leave town. Their hope mirrored what I'd felt learning from Grandpa years ago. I'd stopped checking Mom's Instagram after blocking her number. Her last post, a tearful rant about family betrayal, got no reply from me. Dad's voicemails demanding a share of the $22.5 million went straight to spam. Jacob sent a text asking for a coffee meetup to clear things up. I swiped it away, their signed mediation agreement enough to keep them at bay. The returned silverware and ledgers sat untouched in the study, a reminder of their greed. Ryan Hayes called with news. Your parents breached the protective orders again, he said. His voice clipped. They contacted a store manager pushing for control. Maine's courts slapped them with heavier fines, crushing Dad's real estate deals. His latest venture collapsed under Chapter 7 bankruptcy, his credit score tanking so hard no bank would touch him. Portland's tight business community, loyal to the Moreno name, blacklisted him from new contracts. Brandy Kim dropped by after school, her phone buzzing with notifications. Brianna's done, she said, showing a local news article. The Portland Press-Herald exposed her theft at the funeral backed by mediation leaks. Her influencer status crumbled, sponsors dropped her, and a slander lawsuit I'd filed through Ryan gained traction. Maine's laws hit hard on defamation, and her lost brand deals left her scrambling. Jacob's startup imploded next, his investors wary after the public fallout yanked their funding. Ryan had flagged potential elder abuse charges still looming if we pushed forward. Under Maine law, Jacob could face probation or worse for his role in the financial schemes. His last email hinting at an apology sat unread. I wasn't open to second chances. The seafood chain grew stronger with Anna Reed rolling out an employee ownership plan I'd proposed. Workers, many who'd known Grandpa, now had a stake in the profits. Victoria Grant emailed updated financials. The estate's investments were secure, even expanding. You're honoring their vision, she wrote. I walked the house, pausing at Grandpa's old desk, where a faded photo of us fixing a delivery van hung on the wall. One evening, Luis Alvarez handed me a sealed envelope from the attic. Your grandparents left this for you, he said. Inside was a letter from Grandma Alexis. Choose who you call family by their heart, not their name. Her words steadied me, a guide through the chaos. At school, a shy student lingered after class. My family expects me to pay them back for everything, she said, her voice small. I gave her a folder, legal resources, boundary tips, lessons I'd learned the hard way. You don't owe them your worth, I told her, echoing what I needed at her age. 6 months after the mediation, a local paper ran a story: Moreno Foundation lifts Portland youth. It praised the scholarships and the seafood chain's new profit sharing, no mention of my family's mess. I'd asked Ryan to keep it quiet. The community's support felt enough. I stood by the harbor, a new garden planted where Grandma once grew herbs, a small sign reading Crystal and Eric Moreno, built on trust. That night, Ryan, Brandy, Anna, Victoria, Luis, and Denise gathered for dinner at the house. The table, once a place of betrayal, now held warmth and laughter. They were my family, earned through loyalty. Mom's lawyer sent one last letter, a weak plea for settlement. I shredded it. Dad's call stopped his business, ruined. Jacob's startup folded, his silence final. Their greed had burned their bridges, and I'd built new ones with those who stood by me. The truth was simple: family isn't blood if it's built on lies. Protecting what matters means walking away from those who don't.
I moved your inheritance into my name, starting fresh with someone younger who actually appreciates me. Greg's voice crackled through the phone from whatever beachside paradise he was calling from, followed by that smug laugh I'd grown to despise. You really should have paid more attention to your accounts, sweetheart. The words hit me like ice water, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat quietly in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, watching the rain streak down the window as my 22-year marriage crumbled in real time. I could hear laughter in the background, female laughter, and the sound of waves. Some golf trip. "You're right," I whispered into the phone, my voice steady as stone. "You deserve it." Then I hung up. My name is Danielle Foster, and I'm 45 years old. I work as a senior accountant for Hollowgate Systems, a mid-sized logistics company, and I've spent most of my adult life being methodical, careful, and maybe too trusting. But not today. Today, I felt something shift inside me, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. Greg thought he was clever. He thought that after 2 decades of marriage, he could simply waltz away with the inheritance I'd received from my Uncle Theodore 18 months ago. What he didn't know was that I'd learned to be very, very careful with money, especially after watching him blow through his own savings on his midlife crisis toys. The motorcycle, the expensive golf clubs, the designer clothes he claimed were networking investments. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat back down at my kitchen table, where my laptop was still open to the banking portal I'd been checking when he called. The inheritance, $600,000 plus the family cabin in the mountains, had been my security blanket, my escape plan that I'd hoped I'd never need to use. But Greg's timing was spectacularly poor. What he didn't realize was that Uncle Theodore had been more than just wealthy. He'd been paranoid about money, having lost his first fortune to a scheming business partner decades ago. When he'd left everything to me, he'd also left detailed instructions about protecting inherited wealth from predators and opportunists. I'd followed those instructions to the letter. The phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Greg's number, but I didn't answer. Let him stew. Let him wonder why I'd been so calm, so accepting of his betrayal. He was about to learn that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. Outside, the rain kept falling, and I allowed myself a small smile. Greg had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. Growing up, I'd always been the responsible one. While my friends were out partying, I was studying accounting, planning for a stable future. I met Greg during my senior year of college. He was charming, ambitious, and talked about building an empire together. Back then, I believed him. For 22 years, I'd managed our household finances while Greg chased one get-rich-quick scheme after another. His construction company that folded after 6 months, the restaurant investment that turned into a tax nightmare, the cryptocurrency venture that cost us our vacation fund. Each time, I'd quietly cleaned up the mess, rebuilt our savings, and never said a word about his failures. Greg saw my silence as weakness. I saw it as strategy. When Uncle Theodore passed away last year, I'd grieved not just for the loss of the only family member who truly understood me, but for the end of our Sunday afternoon conversations about money, legacy, and the importance of protecting what you've earned. Theodore had built his wealth twice, once in his 30s, only to lose it all to a business partner's betrayal, and again in his 50s with the hard-won wisdom of experience. "Danielle," he'd told me during one of our last visits, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, "trust is earned daily, but lost in an instant. Protect yourself, even from the people you love most." I'd nodded politely then, thinking he was being overly cautious. Now I understood he'd been giving me a roadmap. After receiving the inheritance, I'd spent weeks meeting with Theodore's financial advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia Wells, who specialized in inheritance protection. Together, we'd structured everything through Gravora Group Private Banking, a firm that catered to clients who valued discretion and security above all else. The accounts weren't just protected by passwords. They were wrapped in layers of fraud detection, legal safeguards, and authorization protocols that required multiple forms of verification for any significant transactions. Greg's name appeared nowhere on any of the documents. In fact, the only way he could have accessed anything was if I'd voluntarily added him as a beneficiary and provided him with the specific authorization codes, which, of course, I hadn't. What Greg had tried to do was probably access our joint checking account, where I'd deposited a small portion of the inheritance for household expenses. But the bulk of Uncle Theodore's gift remained safely locked away, earning interest and waiting for the day I might actually need it. That day, apparently, had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I opened my laptop and began making a list of everything I needed to do. Greg had just handed me the perfect reason to finally take control of my life. The call I'd been expecting came at 7:15 the next morning. Greg's voice was tight with confusion and barely contained panic. "Danielle, what the hell is going on? I tried to transfer the money yesterday, and now the bank is saying there's some kind of investigation. They froze everything." I was already dressed and having coffee, having slept better than I had in months. "Good morning to you too, Greg. How's your golf trip going?" "Cut the crap. What did you do?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring both the rich Colombian blend and the sound of fear creeping into my husband's voice. "I didn't do anything, sweetheart. But apparently you tried to commit bank fraud. That tends to trigger automatic security protocols." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Greg spoke again, his voice strained. "What are you talking about? I'm your husband. I have rights to that money." "Actually, you don't." I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the morning drizzle. Uncle Theodore's inheritance was placed in a protected trust specifically designed to prevent unauthorized access. When you tried to move funds without proper authorization, you triggered fraud prevention measures. You're lying. Married couples share assets automatically. Not inherited assets placed in protective trusts, Greg. Especially not when the beneficiary has been advised to protect those assets from potential threats. I paused, letting that sink in. The bank considers your attempted transfer to be identity theft and attempted grand larceny. I could hear him breathing hard through the phone. In the background, I caught the sound of that same female laughter from yesterday. My replacement was apparently still enjoying her vacation, blissfully unaware that her sugar daddy had just become a liability. "Danielle, you need to fix this. Call the bank and tell them you authorize the transfer." "Why would I do that?" "Because we're married. Because you love me. Because you called me yesterday to announce you were leaving me for someone younger," I finished quietly. "Because you've been lying to me about this golf trip? Because you thought you could steal my inheritance and run off into the sunset?" Another long silence. When Greg spoke again, his voice had lost all its bluster. "I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can, but I'm not interested in hearing it." I set down my coffee cup and reached for the manila folder I'd prepared the night before. "I'm filing for divorce today, Greg. My lawyer will be in touch." "You can't do this. That money belongs to both of us." "No," I said calmly. "It really doesn't. And thanks to your little stunt yesterday, you've just made my divorce attorney's job incredibly easy." I hung up and turned off my phone. Today was going to be a very busy day, and I had a lot of people to call. But first, I was going to enjoy another cup of coffee and watch the rain. For the first time in years, the weather matched my mood perfectly, clear and refreshing. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in the offices of Patterson & Associates, the law firm I'd quietly consulted 3 months ago, when Greg's behavior had started becoming increasingly erratic. My attorney, Jennifer Patterson, was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in complex divorce cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. "Danielle, I have to say, this is one of the cleaner cases I've seen in years," Jennifer said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "Your husband essentially gift-wrapped his infidelity and attempted theft for us." I'd come prepared with everything. Screenshots of Greg's suspicious credit card charges over the past 6 months, including hotels in cities where he'd supposedly been on business trips, expensive dinners for two, and jewelry purchases I'd never received. I also had the banking records showing his attempted unauthorized access to my inheritance, complete with timestamps and fraud alerts. What I don't understand, Jennifer continued, is how he thought he could access a protected trust without your authorization codes. I pulled out my phone and showed her a series of text messages from 6 months ago. He's been asking me about my banking passwords, claiming he wanted to help organize our finances. I always gave him vague answers, but I think he's been watching me enter information when I thought he wasn't paying attention. The truth was more calculated than that. I'd suspected Greg was planning something for months. The late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related, the sudden interest in our financial accounts, the way he'd started asking seemingly innocent questions about Uncle Theodore's inheritance and where exactly the money was being held. I'd started setting traps. 3 weeks ago, I'd left a fake bank statement on my desk, one showing a much smaller inheritance balance in a different account. Greg had photographed it when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd watched him through the reflection in my computer monitor, his fingers flying as he captured the account numbers and routing information. Yesterday's attempted theft had been his move against the wrong account entirely. There's something else, I told Jennifer, pulling out a manila envelope. Greg's been transferring money out of our joint accounts for months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but it adds up to almost $15,000. Jennifer's eyebrows shot up as she reviewed the documentation. Where was the money going? An account I'd never seen before. I hired a private investigator last month to look into it. I slid another document across her desk. Turns out Greg opened a secret account 8 months ago. The money was being used to fund his affair. Hotel rooms, trips, gifts for his girlfriend. And you have proof of the affair? I nodded toward my phone. The investigator followed him to Phoenix last weekend. Photos, video, credit card receipts. His golf trip is actually a romantic getaway with a 28-year-old named Amber, who works at his favorite sports bar. Jennifer was taking notes quickly. This is excellent work, Danielle. With this level of documentation, we can file for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial malfeasance. Plus, his attempted theft yesterday gives us leverage for a very favorable settlement. There's one more thing, I said quietly. When I set up the inheritance protection with my uncle's financial advisor, I included a clause that would automatically revoke any claim Greg might have to shared marital assets if he ever attempted to access the inheritance fraudulently. Jennifer looked up from her notes. You mean his attempt yesterday triggered an automatic forfeiture clause? As of yesterday evening, Greg legally forfeited his claim to our house, our shared savings, and his portion of my retirement accounts. I smiled grimly. Uncle Theodore was very thorough in his advice about protecting family wealth from predators. Jennifer sat back in her chair, looking impressed. Your uncle sounds like he was a very wise man. He was, and he taught me that sometimes the best defense is preparation. The call from Patricia Wells at Gravora Group Private Banking came at 11 a.m., just as I was leaving Jennifer's office. Patricia's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear satisfaction underneath. Mr. Foster has been calling our offices repeatedly since 8 this morning, she said. He seems to be under the impression that he can resolve this situation by speaking to a supervisor. And what have you told him? That any investigation into attempted unauthorized access to protected accounts must be handled through proper legal channels. We've also informed him that his actions have triggered automatic security protocols that cannot be reversed without court intervention. I smiled as I walked to my car. What exactly does that mean for him? Well, the attempted transfer has been reported to federal banking authorities as suspicious activity. Additionally, his social security number has been flagged in our system as a potential threat to account security. Any future attempts to access accounts linked to the trust will result in immediate law enforcement notification. This was even better than I'd hoped. Uncle Theodore's paranoid security measures were turning out to be a gift that kept giving. There's something else, Patricia continued. When we were reviewing the incident, we discovered that Mr. Foster had been making inquiries about your accounts for several months. He called our offices in February, claiming to be your financial advisor and requesting account information. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He did what? Our staff followed protocol and refused to provide any information. But we have records of multiple calls and one in-person visit where he attempted to present himself as your representative. At the time, we simply logged it as suspicious activity, but given yesterday's events, it establishes a clear pattern of premeditation. I pulled into a parking space and sat in my car, processing this information. Greg hadn't just been planning to steal from me. He'd been actively scheming for months, trying to find ways to access money that wasn't his. Patricia, I need you to document everything. My attorney will want copies of all communication logs, security reports, and any evidence of his attempts to access the accounts. Already prepared, she said efficiently. I'll have everything couriered to your lawyer's office within the hour. After hanging up, I sat in my car for several minutes, watching office workers hurry through the drizzle. 22 years of marriage, and I was discovering that my husband was essentially a stranger. The Greg I'd fallen in love with in college would never have attempted something so calculating and cruel. Or maybe he would have, and I'd just been too trusting to see it. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Amber. Greg told me what you did to him. You're a vindictive bitch who doesn't deserve a man like him. He's never been happier than he is with me. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, Tell Greg that when he gets arrested for bank fraud, he'll have plenty of time to think about how happy you make him. The response came immediately. What arrest? I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the text to Jennifer with a note. Evidence of ongoing affair and contact information for the other woman. Then I drove to my office at Hollowgate Systems. I had work to do, and maintaining my normal routine would be important in the days ahead. My colleagues didn't need to know that my personal life was imploding, at least not yet. But as I walked into the building, I felt lighter than I had in months. Greg had been planning his escape for months, thinking he was orchestrating the perfect betrayal. What he didn't realize was that he'd walked straight into a trap that Uncle Theodore had designed specifically for men exactly like him. The knock on my office door at Hollowgate Systems came just before lunch. My supervisor, David Walsh, poked his head in with a concerned expression. Danielle, there are 2 people here to see you. They say they're from federal banking enforcement. My heart skipped, but I kept my voice steady. Send them in, please. 2 agents entered my office. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a younger man who looked like he'd stepped out of a recruiting poster. They showed their credentials and introduced themselves as Agent Martinez and Agent Thompson. Mrs. Foster, we're investigating suspicious banking activity related to your inheritance accounts, Agent Martinez said, settling into the chair across from my desk. We understand your husband attempted to access protected funds without authorization. That's correct. I closed my laptop and gave them my full attention. He called me yesterday from what he claimed was a golf trip to inform me he'd moved my inheritance into his name. When I told him I didn't believe that was possible, he became agitated. Agent Thompson was taking notes. Were you aware of any prior attempts by your husband to access these accounts? Not until this morning when my banking representative informed me there had been previous inquiries. Apparently he'd been calling the bank for months, claiming to be my financial advisor. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I should mention that I'm filing for divorce. My attorney has documentation of financial irregularities in our joint accounts as well. The agents exchanged glances. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Foster, we need you to understand that what your husband attempted wasn't just a civil matter between spouses. Attempting to access federally protected inheritance trusts through fraudulent means is a serious crime. How serious? Bank fraud charges could result in up to 20 years in federal prison and substantial fines, Agent Thompson said quietly, especially when there's evidence of premeditation and ongoing deception. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Greg thought he was stealing my money and running off with his girlfriend. Instead, he'd potentially destroyed his entire future. What happens next? I asked. We'll need you to come in and give a formal statement. We'll also need access to any communications you have with your husband regarding the inheritance and any documentation of suspicious financial activity. Agent Martinez handed me a business card. Your banking institution has been very cooperative in providing evidence of the attempted access. After the agents left, I sat alone in my office, staring out the window at the Portland skyline. Part of me felt guilty for not warning Greg about how thoroughly protected the inheritance was. But then I remembered his phone call yesterday. The smugness in his voice, the casual cruelty of announcing his betrayal, the laughter of another woman in the background. Greg had made his choice. He'd chosen to see my patience as weakness, my trust as stupidity, and my love as something he could exploit and discard. My phone rang. Greg's number again. This time, I answered. Danielle, please, you have to help me. There are federal agents asking questions. This has gone too far. Has it? I asked quietly. I made a mistake, okay? I got scared about our future, about money, and I panicked. But we can fix this. We can work it out. Greg, you didn't make a mistake. You planned this for months. You opened secret accounts. You lied about business trips. You've been stealing from our joint savings to fund your affair, and you attempted to commit federal bank fraud. My voice was calm, almost conversational. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught. What do you want from me? What will it take to make this go away? Nothing, I said. There's nothing you can do to make this go away. You did this to yourself. Then I hung up and went to lunch. The news that Greg had been arrested came 3 days later through a call from Agent Martinez. I was at home, preparing dinner for one, and actually enjoying the quiet, when my phone rang. Mrs. Foster, I wanted to inform you that we've taken your husband into custody on charges of attempted bank fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations. I set down my wooden spoon and leaned against the kitchen counter. Where was he arrested? Phoenix. He was attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica with his companion when airport security detained him. Agent Martinez's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Apparently, fleeing the country while under federal investigation isn't advisable. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Jennifer Patterson with the update. She was delighted with the news, explaining that Greg's arrest would expedite our divorce proceedings significantly. A spouse in federal custody for financial crimes pretty much eliminates any claim he might have had to marital assets, she said. Plus, his attempted flight from the country suggests consciousness of guilt. That evening, I received a series of increasingly frantic voicemails from Amber, Greg's girlfriend. The first was angry, accusing me of destroying a good man out of spite. By the third message, her tone had shifted to pleading, asking if there was anything I could do to help Greg. I deleted them all without responding. The next morning, my doorbell rang. A courier delivered a thick envelope containing documents from Gravora Group Private Banking. Patricia Wells had included a handwritten note. All security protocols have been reset. Your inheritance remains fully protected and has continued earning interest throughout this ordeal. Your uncle would be proud. I smiled, thinking about Uncle Theodore's warnings about predators and opportunists. He'd been absolutely right, and his preparations had saved me from losing everything to a man who'd never deserved my trust in the first place. 6 weeks later, I stood in the courthouse as Judge Morrison finalized my divorce decree. Greg appeared via video link from federal detention, looking haggard and defeated. His public defender had advised him to agree to all terms, rather than fight a battle he couldn't win. The settlement was everything Jennifer had promised. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, the inheritance, and my car. Greg kept his legal troubles and a debt to the federal government that would follow him for decades. The defendant forfeited any claim to marital assets through his attempted fraudulent access to protected accounts, Judge Morrison stated for the record. This divorce is granted with prejudice, and all financial arrangements are final and non-negotiable. As I walked out of the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Catherine. Saw the news about Greg's sentencing. 28 months in federal prison. Are you okay? I texted back, never been better. That afternoon, I met with Patricia Wells to discuss investment strategies for my newfound financial freedom. The inheritance, combined with my half of our previous shared assets, gave me enough security to consider early retirement, or perhaps starting my own accounting practice. Your uncle included a letter to be given to you after any legal proceedings involving the inheritance were resolved, Patricia said, handing me a sealed envelope. Inside, Uncle Theodore's familiar handwriting offered his final advice. Danielle, if you're reading this, it means someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. I hope my preparation served you well. Remember that the greatest wealth is peace of mind, and you've earned yours. Build something beautiful with what remains. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. Uncle Theodore had given me more than money. He'd given me the tools to recognize my own worth and the strength to protect it. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that were entirely mine to choose. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here, from trusting wife to empowered woman in just a few short months. Greg's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating, forcing me to discover a strength I never knew I possessed.